So did the God of the Bible lie because humans were too stupid to understand how the cosmos was created and what the cosmos is, and therefore create the confusion that is now the flat earthers? Or did an ancient Israelite people coming into their own after the Bronze Age collapse borrow from the previous nations that had controlled them and add a little tweak to insist upon their monotheism? This is what we're going to explore for a few minutes, according to Ted Jones' questions about the second day and the creation of the firmament. So when you read Genesis 1, on the second day, it says that God separated the waters from below to the waters of above, creating the firmament, and that the firmament was a dome. Now in Job and other places of the Bible, it talks about this God creating the foundations that the earth stood upon and spreading out the cosmos like a metal sheet mirror, also inferring a dome, as well as, like in Genesis, the portals of the heavens, the windows of the heaven were opened so that rain can thrust through for your Noah story. These are some of the thought processes that many flat earthers get their idea of a dome and a flat earth, that they then try to add bad science to in order to create their theory and call it facts. But what is the actual true story concerning this? Well, many Christians throughout history have thought that the earth was flat and has a dome over it. But then as we got until around the 300s, early 400s, we had the early church father, Augustine, who actually proposed that when this God, Yahweh, began to speak to man and tell them of their story, that he spoke to them in a way that they would be able to understand it based on their level of scientific knowledge. And then over 1,000 years later, John Calvin reiterated this thought with the doctrine of accommodation, that this God created the earth, explained it to man, but he created the earth instantly, but explained it to man in a way that man would be able to understand it based on his limited knowledge, and had to lower himself to the level of man so that man could be able to understand what is going on when they look up in the sky and they see blue, and they look at the water and they see blue. So this idea that the earth is flat and that Sheol lives below, and that there are foundations that the earth stand on, that there is a dome, an impenetrable dome that covers the earth, and then there are waters above, and the stars and the sun and the moon are within the dome up in the firmament to which birds grace the face of, is the theory that flat earthers are standing on, but is also what early church fathers, until Columbus sailed and the Europeans realized that the earth was not flat, that it was actually a sphere, even though previous civilizations around the world had already espoused the idea. The Egyptians, later Egyptians, I should say, later Egyptians, Greeks, Southern Africans, Aztecs, Mayans had already espoused the idea that the earth was actually a sphere by utilizing hundreds of years of observation of the skies. But what is the real truth? Was there a firmament created? Was this God trying to accommodate man for his lack of knowledge? I would think that a God who is all-knowing would know that the confusion that he would create, and how people today, once they realize that this God was not telling early man the entire truth, would realize that he was creating confusion, and also creating an opportunity for people to look at what he calls his word and be able to break it down and say that this God did not understand science, or the people just lied, or that this God just lied. But the most likely story is not the theory of accommodation, but the most likely story is the fact that the people of the Levant, who became the Israelites in and around 1000 BCE, would have, after the Bronze Age collapsed in around 1000 BCE, would have known of other stories that were told by their predecessors and then took those stories and made them into their own, but added a twist of monotheism in order to make their God the single source one God, differing from those previous gods. And I will give you two examples of those. And the first one would be the group that ruled the Levant from 3000 BCE up until about 1200 BCE, ushering in the Bronze Age collapse after they were defeated by the Phoenicians. And that would be the Egyptian story. You see, the oldest version of the Bible, of the Old Testament that was written, that we have to this day, is the Leningrad Codex. The Leningrad Codex is written in Paleo-Hebrew. And in that Paleo-Hebrew, it expresses the thought process in and around that 900, 800, 700 BCE. Similar thoughts to the Egyptian story, but yet changing it a bit to make it their monotheistic God that is not born and does not have children. So they took the Ra story, which is a deity that was conceptualized out of the cosmic egg, and then began to create the universe. And in creating the universe, unlike this monotheistic God of the Hebrew, this God birthed out new children. Those two children would be Jeb and Nut. Jeb and Nut were locked into an embrace. Jeb being the waters above, and Nut being the waters below, the salt water and the sea water. But they was in such an embrace that there was no land to be found and nothing could live. So Ra begat his second daughter, who was Shu, standing in the middle. Shu then blew, she represents the wind, and separated the waters, the upper waters, from the lower waters. Similar to your Genesis story of how the Ruach, the breath of God, breathed over the waters to create the land. But in this case, they wanted a single God to have done all things, not a God that was having children, because of their separation from other people. Now, during this time frame, you must realize that this kingdom of Israel came about as many other minor kingdoms began to come up, and this is the northern kingdom of Israel at that, began to come up simply because the Egyptians had lost to the Phoenicians. So there was a scramble of nations that was being created. And this is when the Israelite people finally had a chance to create their own nations. And they created the northern nation of Israel and the southern nation of Judah. The southern nation of Judah was in the mountainous area, which made them more difficult to conquer, while the Israelite kingdom, more in flatlands, were easier to conquer. And they were going through many different nations, conquering them from the Syrians to the Syro-Assyrians, the Assyrians themselves, and until finally the Babylonians conquered them. They was always being beset upon by the Chaldeans and the Phoenicians and other tribes. So from those tribes who were previously Canaanite and Akkadians, they also understood the story of Marduk. According to the story of Marduk, Tiamat, the primordial ooze, was married to Anu, the waters above the heavens. And Anu and Tiamat then birthed out children. The children became so noisy that Anu wanted to destroy all the children. And the children decided that they were going to slay Anu, and so they slayed Anu. Once they slayed Anu, Tiamat lost her shit. And she had then married one of her sons, Kingu, but she lost her shit. And so the god Tiamat, the god Marduk, who was a Babylonian god, and this is probably where they get this idea in the actual biblical Hebrew that was written during the Babylonian captivity, that was the last edit of the book of Genesis. But Marduk slain Tiamat and then created the universe, created the earth based on the body of Tiamat, and then from the blood of Kingu, he mixed that blood with clay and then created man. Now, the early Egyptians did not like the idea of violence, of warrior violence being the thing that created man, that created the universe, and that their God, their benevolent God of love, would not do such a thing. And so they wanted to change that story and make that story into this God created out of itself or nothingness. Well, not nothingness, but out of itself, or the waters that was already present. And so that's why it has many similarities to it. This is the most likely story of where the firmament comes from. Y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is